When we meditate, do we hope to transcend the body and enter another world of awakened mind? Or do we seek to engage more fully in our bodily experience and the larger material world? More specifically, with my time here, I want to explore the place of the material world within the transcendent non-dual visions of Dzogchen we've heard a few speakers speak about. In gazing into the sky, this well-known practice, are the emerging visions perceived by the ordinary fleshy eye or some sort of more developed wisdom eye? Put another way, do these visions unfold in the actual blue sky or in some more interior imaginal space? These kinds of questions have long been debated in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Consider, for example, Longchenpa's response to these lines from the Dra-Telgyur, an early Dzogchen Yingtik commentary, which reads, "The expanse has outer and inner aspects. The outer is apprehended as a cloudless sky, the inner expanse as the pure lamps that are expressed there." So to this, Longchenpa responds, "Regarding this, there is someone in his day who identifies the outer expanse as merely the cloudless sky. This is utterly inappropriate. The ordinary sky is not established in connection to a person, and the visionary lamps are correlated with whether a person is present. Here, the blue expression of the inner space appearing outwardly is what we call the outer expanse, so a sort of exteriorization of an interior space. The sky opens the possibility for this, yes, but this is not the actual expanse." So here we see Longchenpa interpreting the outer expanse away from being just the cloudless sky mentioned in the Dra-Telgyur, viewed by an embodied subject, toward a more inner space, like a space that is inherent to the subject, even as it is, in some sense, exteriorized. While Longchenpa's visionary space may initially be opened by gazing at the sky, it ultimately leaves behind our common experience of such mundane upper regions. Precisely why Longchenpa insists on his more interiorized reading remains unstated, but he does go on to explain that the true visionary expanse must be dependent on the meditating subject. The actual sky as a space that exists apart from that meditative subject is just too objective. One wonders here if Longchenpa might have been defending Dzogchen from critics in the 14th century who did not like the central role materiality played in the earlier Nyingtik sources, such as the Dra-Telgyur. The very early Nyingtik tantras and so on focus a lot on materiality. In any case, some 6 centuries later, we find a related discussion in the early 20th century writings of Patrul Namkha Jikmé, who lived from 1888 to 1960. As already mentioned, he was the son of Dudjom Lingpa and reincarnation of Patrul Rinpoche. Namkha Jikmé wrote a lengthy and comprehensive work on Dzogchen theory and practice, titled the Yeshe Selwar Tunba, or a lucid teaching on primordial wisdom. This work is framed as a commentary to a relatively short terma text of the 16th century, the Dzogchen Yeshe Kundzok, a treasure, a terma, revealed by the Drikung master Rinchen Puntsok, who revealed it as part of his larger Gompa Yangsap cycle from the Yeshe Tsogyal cave at Terdrum in Tibet. So Namkha Jikmé introduces his discussion of the Dzogchen visions polemically by raising a hypothetical objection to them. Some opponents say, he writes, since these Dzogchen visions rely on causes and conditions, and because they are seen with sense organs, meaning the fleshy eyes, it is untenable for them to be called a direct perception of dharmata, chunying unzum, which is a technical term in this tradition. So whenever I say dharmata here, I'm talking about chunyi, sometimes translated as reality. I'm going to stick with the Sanskrit term. Anyway, regarding our Dzogchen claim, Latsen Namkha Jikmé continues, that these are visions of the pure realm of the Sambhogakaya, they further argue that it is not reasonable for them to be seen by one who has not attained the bhumis and so forth. There are many such objections. Put another way, Namkha Jigmé's opponents pose two questions. First, how can our ordinary physical eyes see the Dharmata so immediately? And second, how can an ordinary person who's not even attained the first bhumi see appearances of the sublime Sambhogakaya? The sources Namkha Jigmé cites in answering these questions indicate that his opponents here are followers of Sarma Tantric systems, and particularly of the Kālacakra and the Arya school of Guhya Samaja exegesis. Perhaps then he has in mind some Gelugpa or someone who, but this is never really made explicit who his opponents are. Having framed his discussion, though, of this relationship between the ordinary physical body and these transcendent visions, kind of polemically, Namkha Jigmé begins his response in this way. Quote, our Dzogchen visions are similar to the empty forms of my opponent's own Kālacakra Tantra. So it's not worth my while to refute those who are aligned with vow breakers who simply draining their own lineage, meaning, well, your Kālacakra is just the same, so stop complaining. He proceeds to identify a lengthy series of passages from Sarma Tantras that are similar to the Dzogchen visionary practices. From the Kālacakra itself, for example, he quotes, quote, in the middle of the cloudless sky, a yogin should look with wide open eyes, end quote. So Sarmapa, who criticized Dzogchen, in other words, need to look at their own Kālacakra-based visionary practices, which are essentially the same. I could digress into, he goes on at some length about the relationship of the visions in Kālacakra versus Dzogchen, but it's very technical, so I'll leave that aside. Even so, objects Namkha Jigmé's hypothetical opponent once more, only people on the first bhumi should be able to see these Dharmata visions directly. Namkha Jigmé responds, in one sense, when the shape of the actual sun is covered by clouds, so this is a metaphor, when the actual sun is covered by clouds, even if its rays are only seen a little bit, we still call it seeing the sun. It would be foolhardy, after all, to say that for the sun to be present, its light and rays must be present, and that if those aren't there, there's no sun. Here, Namkha Jigmé is saying that the Dzogchen visions seen by ordinary beings may be filtered by their karmic impurities, but they remain nonetheless visions of the Dharmata. He explains further, you say that it is impossible for an impure mind to see the Sambhogakaya, but created emanations of Buddhas and so forth do appear for ordinary beings, after all, and they become actual Nirmanakaya Buddhas for those who have consummated the paths of accumulation and application, and then they further become halfway Sambhogakayas for bodhisattvas up to the 10th bhumi, and finally a self-appearing indivisibility of Sambhogakaya and Dharmakaya for Buddhas. So according to Namkha Jigmé here, the same visions will appear differently depending on the viewer's level of realization. As one's insight grows, the appearances fade into luminosity, gradually transforming from physical appearances into full-blown Nirmanakayas, then slowly dissolving into luminous forms of Sambhogakaya until they are experienced as full-blown non-dual luminous manifestations of form and emptiness. As the clouds of our karmic impurities burn away, in other words, the sun's light rays become clearer, but they always originate from beginning to end from the same sun. Namkha Jigmé concludes, therefore, from the perspective of the view of the abiding nature, there's no contradiction in saying the visions are actually, right from the beginning, Dharmakaya and Sambhogakayas. This makes perfect sense. Taking another tack, Namkha Jigmé again approaches his opponent's question of whether visionary Sambhogakaya forms can be seen with one's ordinary fleshy eyes. At this point, Namkha Jigmé moves beyond simply quoting Sarma sources and begins to form his own arguments. Quote, as for seeing with the ordinary eye, sense faculty, if we examine this in detail, here the visions are seen by the far-reaching lasso lamp of primordial wisdom. They're not seen by the support of that, i.e. the ordinary eye, although that seeing is dependent on the support of the sense faculty. So here, Namkha Jikmé introduces some careful nuance. Ordinary beings may be able to see the Dharmata, and their ordinary bodies may be necessary as supports for their practice. But when they see that Dharmata, they do so with a kind of transcendent inner eye, this far-reaching lasso. And this is a kind of spontaneous imaginal eye that emerges concurrently with the visions. Longchenpa already talked about this. And this is similar, he reminds us, to the situation described in Sarma text. So he cites the Vajrapani's Kālacakra-inspired commentary to the Chakra Samvara, quote, "It's not realized with the eye, nor is it realized without the eye." The precise nature of the relationship between the physical body and the transcendent visions then is difficult to describe, perhaps even paradoxical. Namkha Jikmé then delves further into this paradoxical relationship between the material world and the visions of Dharmata. He raises this hypothetical question. If, from the perspective of the abiding nature, there's no difference between seeing earth and stones and seeing luminous appearances, well, why are you praising these visions so much? To answer this, Namkha Jikmé turns to the concept of the supreme conventional, or the supreme conventional truths, Tlakpe Kunzol. In particular, he raises the subtle body of channels and winds as another example, like the visions of Dharmata, of a phenomenon that partakes of both the physical and the transcendent, the conventional and the ultimate. Quote, "From the perspective of phenomenal qualities in their manner of appearance, the three subtle doors of channels, winds, and tigle, drops, are the basis for accomplishing the body, speech, and mind of all the Buddhas. All these aspects of the subtle body are seen as the mandala of reality, Chunyi Ngu Tongwa." Sort of similar language to that Chunyi Ngunsum, or direct perception of Dharmata. So this subtle body is seen similarly to these visions, and which is the supreme convention, Tlakpe Kunzol, mentioned in the tantras of our own and other traditions. The impure is the opposite of that supreme conventional. The difference between impure conventional and supreme conventional, which involves clinging to mistaken appearances, is like the metaphor of the mottled rope and the snake, where someone mistakes a rope for a snake. A distinction between true and false conventional truths. Namkha Jikmé thus offers the tantric subtle body as an example of a supreme convention, a body that is always already present and common to us all, yet also purer somehow, energetically more subtle than these gross heaps of flesh that we drag around through our daily existences. But what is a supreme convention, you may ask? Ju Mipam, in his commentary to the Gyusangwe Nyingbo, explains it in these terms. The supreme conventional truth abides as inseparable appearance and emptiness, beyond the individual two truths of conventional and ultimate. In terms of its purity with regard to the bodies and primordial wisdoms of Buddhas, it is superior to the ordinary two truths. In truth, whatever conventional appearances there are at the time of the ground and path and the final ultimate that appears at the time of the final result, are indivisible with respect to the ground, result, and essence. This is the supreme truth, the view of the great Dharmakaya. So according to Mipam then, the supreme conventional transcends the conventional and the ultimate, expressing an indivisible union of the two truths, of ground and result, of the ordinary body and a Buddha body. It offers an inclusive intermediate space, one might say, that is open to ordinary beings of the conventional world, yet partakes of the ultimate. The subtle body and the visions of Dzogchen too are supreme conventions like this. They constitute a kind of non-dual pivot between our ordinary body and the body of a Buddha, a conventional truth that can be reduced to neither. In this sense, Namkha Jikmé offers an ontology of the body that is inextricable from the immediate approach of Dzogchen, bringing the ultimate truth into the conventional, the body of the Buddha immediately into the ordinary body of a sentient being. whereas Namkha Jikmé's opponents insist on reducing bodies to one side or the other of this duality, on distinguishing ordinary bodies from Buddha bodies. Namkha Jikmé prefers to remain open to this paradoxical kind of undecidability of the supreme conventional, open to eyes that are at once ordinary and extraordinary, fleshy and transcendent. Thank you.